Hey guys, in this week's episode, we're going to review Stagecoach, the John Ford, John Wayne collaboration, with a special guest this week. But before that, we're also going to be talking about the Jay and Silent Bob reboot and Deerskin. Is that right?
Is that a movie, or are we just going to talk about, hunting and skinning deer? I don't know.
Yeah.
Stay tuned to find out. Hello and welcome to the Casual Cinecast, powered by Cinelinx. My name is Chris, and with me as always is a man who can sober up with just a splash of water and some coffee. Myke, how you doing today?
Pretty good. You have no idea how much coffee's in me right now.
Yeah, you
Get it?
Got to sober up.
Yeah.
Also with us is a man that spends his off time when he's not podcasting falling between horses. How you doing today, Justin?
I'm sore. It's not easy falling between horses.
Yeah. Falling between horses.
It hurts.
Yeah,
Not jumping.
not jumping. He just falls.
No. I can't jump. I can only go down, not up.
Well, that makes sense. Also with us, our special guest is Myke with a Y. This shouldn't be confusing at all. How are you doing today, Myke with a Y?
I'm doing good, guys. I am getting over a bad case of social prejudice, but otherwise fine.
Nice.
We're trapped in a podcast together. We better get along.
Yeah. Yeah. That is a reference to the movie for anybody who's unsure
I think these
about.
were all references to the movie. I think that was...
I know, but I just want to make sure.
Myke, before we talk a little bit more about what we're doing today, why don't you tell us where you're from and, what you do?
Well, I grew up in the great state of Houston. Now, hey, guys, I am from the CineMusts podcast, a podcast lamentedly on a bit of a hiatus right now because I am incredibly busy with new work responsibilities, but... I'm a big fan of the Casual Cinecast. I have had Justin, Chris, and Myke on for episodes on our show before. Justin, incredibly recently, talking about The Tree of Life, a film he believes is the best movie of the 2010s, but our listeners do not agree. It did not get voted an absolute must-see movie. I apologize. I took this opportunity to break the news to you like that, Justin.
Oh, man. I got to go fall between a horse, guys. I'll be right back.
Yeah, so CineMusts, we're talking must-see movies. Like I said, we're on a bit of a hiatus right now, but we're still doing our best to deliver some sporadic episodes here or there, and we should be back in full swing once summer starts.
Yeah, that's good news.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, we appreciate you being here, Myke. Once we were doing Stagecoach, I think we all pretty much decided that we should have you here because you're a big fan of Westerns.
Yeah, and is it also because I think I took the opportunity when Justin was on our show to moan and groan about how Stagecoach was not going to be the focus of this episode? I think at the time we recorded, it was going to be on the waterfront.
That's pretty much it.
On the waterfront had like a heavy lead when we recorded, and then Stagecoach surged ahead. And
Myke willed it to be so.
Yeah, no one is more surprised and more delighted than I am.
Except for all those fake accounts that you created to make it win. So.
It only took 3 hours and lots of fake Twitter accounts.
Worth it.
If this is your first time listening to our show, this is a Casually Criterion episode, which is a Criterion Collection focused episode we do every other week where we review a film from, you guessed it, the Criterion Collection that is picked by the listeners. Before we get into the main review, we'll be doing our usual News on the March talk, where we talk about the news and things we've been watching over the last week. So if you haven't seen the movie or you're not interested, you could still listen, and then we will move into the show. It will all clearly be time-stamped, so worry not.
Yeah, and if you want to vote in the poll to pick our next Criterion film, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Casual Cinecast. The polls are on Twitter, but we post about them on Facebook and Instagram. You can also send us your questions or topics to discuss about the movies we're reviewing each week to those social media accounts. You can also send them to casualcinemedia at gmail.com. And then, of course, if you haven't done so yet and you enjoy the show, help other people find the show by going onto iTunes, give us a 5-star review, and let people know that we're a good show that people should be listening to.
All right, guys. So we have a full show. So before we get into our Stagecoach review, spine number 516, are you guys ready to move into news on the march?
Mm-hmm.
March on.
Yeah.
You on the mark!
So, Chris, Justin, what have you guys been up to?
So over the last year, I've been going to the Alamo Drafthouse quite a bit, and they have a rewards program, and the highest level is Top Brass, and you have to see, I think it's 50 movies within the year in order to get Top Brass. Now, that was aided by seeing like 18 movies at the Graveyard Fest like in 4 days, so that helped quite a bit. But I hit the Top Brass, and I saw 50 movies this last year at the Alamo Drafthouse. And they do like a party, I think it's like once a year, and they had a secret screening this last weekend, and I invited Justin to come with me. And the cool thing about secret screenings is you don't know what the movie's going to be, and you kind of just put yourself in somebody else's hands and hope that the movie's going to be good and interesting. And Justin, what did you think of this movie? It was Deerskin.
Well, as with like the Alamo Drafthouse, they kind of cater to, people that have a bit of a more like odd or quirky or weird taste in things. If you've ever
they do a lot of cult cinema.
Yeah, a lot of cult cinema. If you've ever been to like any of their screenings, the stuff that's playing for like the 20 to 30 minutes before the movie starts when you take your seat is all like, seems like obscure stuff that's related to the film, but just like really weird stuff that like 9 times out of 10 you're going to ask yourself, why does this exist and who made this and for who? And Deerskin is no different. It's a bizarre movie. I'm going to read the IMDb synopsis because I have tried to tell like 3 of my friends about it since watching it on Saturday, and it's just been I've just done poorly every time. But the IMDb synopsis says a man's obsession with his designer deerskin jacket causes him to blow his life savings and turn to crime. Which is a bit of a weird synopsis. Like he turns to crime, but he's also at the same time masquerading as a filmmaker who's shooting a film, and lots of other weird stuff happens.
Yes.
But it stars Jean Dujardin, who's the lead from The Artist, won an Oscar, and also Adele Hanel, which is one of the leads from Portrait of a Lady on Fire, for people who've seen that. And now that I've sufficiently introduced the movie, I enjoyed it. I didn't love it. It's funny and weird, and I don't know. Like it's hard to really love the film just because it's so. I don't want to say unapproachably weird.
Quirky.
Yeah, it's like so weird or quirky that I have trouble like really connecting with it. It's just kind of a somewhat entertaining watch.
Yeah, I would agree with that to a certain extent. I enjoyed it. It like certainly where we watched it was the right place to watch it with that crowd.
Sure.
But it is. I found it quite funny. But it is very, very weird and strange. And just like you, Justin, it's hard to explain it. Like I've tried to explain it to my friends as well, and you're just like, I don't know. Like you also don't want to give away too much. Like go in being pretty blind with this movie because it's going to surprise you where it goes, I think. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I had a good time. And it's a short movie. It's like 74 minutes, so it's not very long.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really
Yeah.
cool.
I'm looking at the director now, Quentin Dupieux? Dupieux? I don't know how you say his
Dupieux?
name exactly. Dupieux? Yeah. He directed that movie from like 2010, I want to say, called Rubber.
Yeah.
About the killer tire.
Yeah, with like the like telekinesis powers or something like that. It seemed like.
Yeah, which I saw, and my feelings on that movie were pretty much exactly what you're describing for Deerskin. Like, it's a concept, all right.
It's an oddity that's like,
yeah.
You're not upset that you watched it though. It's well made.
Yeah. But it seems like if he had to stretch it beyond like 90 minutes, it could not be done.
Yeah, I was.
That's how I felt about.
Yeah,
Rubber.
I was ready for it to be over when it ended, for sure.
Yeah. Well, that sounds cool. Sounds like a fun experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
I think if
And
I were
it actually comes
I
out.
guess that's the least they could do for Chris dropping like what? It sounds like $500
Was
or
it
more.
$500? They also gave me a $25 gift certificate.
50
so-
tickets, right? 50 movies?
Well, a lot of the movies are less than $10.
I'm rounding.
But yes, somewhere like that. Thanks for reminding me how much money I spent
You're
at the
welcome.
Alamo Draft House.
Yeah. But this film, I think it played at Cannes last year, and it just hasn't been released in the U.S. yet. So another cool thing, the secret screening wasn't just some weird obscure movie. It was like something that most people haven't even had a chance to see yet. So that made it extra cool.
It is cool.
Yeah, the release date's
really
March
cool.
20th of this year.
I'm looking at the cover now, and I thought this was Jeffrey Dean Morgan.
Oh, I can
Kind of
see
looks
that.
like, yeah.
The poster on IMDb.
Yeah, I think if I were to just like relate this movie via like if other movies, I guess, I got a real heavy like, but a little more comedic Under the Skin vibe
Okay.
from this movie.
Cool.
Wow, funnier than Under the Skin?
Yeah,
It's hard to imagine.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
That is a laugh riot, that movie.
Yeah, and I didn't even think about the fact that they both have skin in the title. I just there were just several times.
Is
like
it like Under this?
Go ahead.
Is it like Under the Skin in the same way that like Under the Skin is like Species?
Not quite. They just like visually, they kind of reminded me of each other and certain things that
okay, I
happened
see.
in the movie, and like the tone of the movie at times felt very similar.
All right, cool. Anything else about Deerskin that you guys feel like you want to talk about?
No, I recommend it if you want to just see like a weird movie unlike any other movie you've ever seen. Once it comes
Do you
out,
know when it's coming out or when it'll be released?
Chris, what did you say earlier? March 20th?
March 20th of this year, yeah.
Like VOD or like in theaters, you think?
I can't imagine this going to theaters. It's pretty short to begin with. Maybe it'll play at the Alamo Drafthouse type of place, but I imagine VOD is where it's going to show up.
Yeah, that's my thought too.
Yeah, kind of like what was that movie we watched last year? There was like a VOD.
Under the Silver Lake.
No,
Triple Frontier?
That was
no,
Dragged
that was
Across
Netflix.
Concrete?
Dragged Across Concrete.
Yep,
yeah.
that's the one I was going for. I was like, this director seems like that director, which is like more of like a cult guy rather than any kind of mainstream appeal whatsoever.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Speaking of cult films with very little mainstream appeal, I watched something, I think last night or the night before.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a film that I had little interest in, but I've seen all the rest of the movies in this cinematic universe, so I had to catch the newest one. And I am referring, of course, to the Jay and Silent Bob reboot.
Okay. Is that the
Yeah.
title? Jay and Silent Bob get a reboot or Jay and Silent Bob something? Doesn't matter.
You know what? I should probably check. Let me look real quick.
Is Jay
you
and
had
Silent
me.
Bob Reboot?
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I thought there was more to it.
Don't make me
Whatever.
question myself.
What a dumb title then.
Simple,
Yeah, well,
easy to remember.
that's the level of creativity that Kevin Smith is working with these days.
Yeah. Ouch.
Yeah. So, my
Doesn't
thoughts
bode
on
well
Jay
for
and
the
Silent Bob reboot. This movie is pretty much probably exactly what you would expect if you have seen anything Kevin Smith has done in the last 20 years. What is you guys' relationship with Kevin Smith, first of all? Let's start with Myke. I would like Myke with a Y.
God dang, I almost got away. I like him. He gets less good as he goes along. I'm trying to remember like the last Kevin Smith movie that I actually enjoyed. And
I think mine was Dogma.
that might be mine too.
Did no one like Red State? Most people like Red State.
I admire Red State.
Yeah, Red State and Tusk are both like I don't really like that, but I can appreciate going all out in that angle.
Okay.
I never saw Tusk.
It's fine.
Yeah. That's how I feel about Red State. It's like it feels like there was a lot of like punk rock spirit that made Red State that makes me want to like it more than I do.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah, it's such
yeah,
a left turn.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty lukewarm on Kevin Smith. I think Clerks is probably still my favorite and that makes me sad when my favorite movie from a director is their first movie, because it's all downhill from there. But, Mallrats holds a place in my heart. I like Chasing Amy and Dogma well enough. But, yeah, I think Dogma was the last movie of his I watched that I just really liked and continue to like.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Justin?
Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not far off from Myke with a Y. I think Dogma's the last movie that I really enjoyed from him. Clerks 2 was enjoyable, but I think, just like Myke was saying, most of his movies have been fine to bad past Dogma. So I'm not a big fan. And I used to really like him, but it's like he's kind of slowly worn off on me, where I'm like, I'm not that interested anymore,
Yeah, it's kind of like the feeling of growing up and not being into the same music you used to be in, too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah, I agree with both of you guys so far. I feel like Dogma was the last movie where I feel like Kevin Smith had like a movie in his head that he had to get out on paper. And every movie since then has been like, I need to make a movie. Gotta pay some bills,
Yeah.
Like, I feel like Dogma was the last time he had anything to say.
Yeah, maybe have something to say. I feel like Red State is a little bit more of like a fire in his heart to tell a story rather than I need to make a movie. But
yeah,
I could agree with that.
I would like to see him do more in the vein of Red State.
I'm not saying it's a great movie necessarily. It's got more love in it than some of the things that he's done since like Dogma.
Yeah, it's definitely like the standout of like the last 20 years.
Oh, yeah. If I had to pick one Kevin Smith movie of the last, 20 years to watch right now, it would probably be Red State.
Yeah. I'll answer for Kevin Smith, too. As I was a big fan in high school, as I think a lot of people were who were my age. And I think Kevin Smith is definitely a filmmaker for younger audiences, because I even liked Clerks 2 when it came out. I went to theaters to see it, and I was a fan of it then. Of course, I have watched it at some point within the last like several years, and it's not good. I still kind of enjoy it, but it's not good necessarily. And
yeah,
I think it's better than Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, which is a little bit harder to get through, despite a couple of fun performances in there.
The Good Will Hunting 2 thing from Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, like that's the best thing Kevin Smith's done in the last 20 years.
How do you like them apples?
Yeah, I think it's good, and it's fun to see like the cameos from like most of the characters from his previous films. Like, it's pretty fun. The only thing that I'll disagree with everybody on, and just I guess have a slight difference of opinion, is that Mallrats is my favorite movie of his. That movie has like a big soft spot for me. I watched it a ton. It was a huge influence on the film that I made for grad school. Like to the point where, most people like call out Kevin Smith as a big influence on it, and they're like, "Oh, you must love Kevin Smith and Clerks," because I see a lot of Clerks, and really there's just a lot of Mallrats in it because they're very similar movies.
Yeah.
Maybe they're trying not to offend you. They don't know that you love it, so they can't call it Mallrats because
they think it's bad.
Yeah, because they think everybody hates Mallrats.
Yeah, they're like, well, that sounds mean.
Yeah.
No, I would be honored. But I really like Chasing Amy. I think and Dogma 2. I think the key ingredient is Jason Lee and him really mesh well. And I think that without Jason Lee, as he's mostly been,
he's like Jason Lee is to Kevin Smith what Samuel L. Jackson is to Tarantino.
Right. Like every time he shows up, he does well, and he knocks it out of the park, and it just seems like they're made for each other. So that's where I am.
Okay. Well, yeah. So I would be interested to see what you end up thinking about the reboot.
Me too. I'm excited about it.
What you're describing with the Jay and Silent Bob thing about how it's probably not the best movie, but you enjoy it anyway because of some performances and callbacks to other characters and stuff. That is this movie. I feel like this movie is of the quality of Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, but maybe a little less good. But that said, there's also some callbacks to other... Like, here's what I will say. When there's callbacks to jokes that weren't funny in Clerks 2, it's extra cringy. right? Like, remember the goodbye horses joke in Clerks 2 that Jay does, where he like does the Silence of the Lambs thing?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
It's a bit that I enjoy.
That's still there.
That's a
still
bit that
there,
I
as
enjoy.
if-
I'm sorry.
Okay, well, then this movie might be for you, man, because he just doubles down on things like that. Like if you thought the jokes were funny the first time, there might be some humorous callbacks. If you found them to be the first time,
Yeah.
get ready for more. You know,
Yeah. Well, this is the thing with callback jokes is like, if it's just repeating the same joke again, I hate them. Like, I just think it's real lazy. Like I don't know if you remember, you might have tried to erase this from your memory, but when you and I, Mike, saw Zoolander 2 together.
I remember the experience.
That movie is just like, let's just repeat the same jokes and not actually like reinvent them or put a twist on them to make them like callbacks, but kind of a new joke so that there's something new to laugh at.
Yeah, like Arrested Development is really good about doing callback jokes, but then like carrying it further and making the joke something even more ridiculous than you ever thought it could be.
Right.
And then there's like the kind of callback where it's literally like, remember the time we did this joke 10 years ago?
Yeah.
Now you're
Yeah.
older.
It's like if I wanted to
we're
hear the
older.
same joke
Look at
again,
this.
I just go watch the movie I already like, you know, where
Right.
it works.
Well, so Jay and Silent Bob Reboot's full of a lot of that stuff, right? But what I will say is there are homages to some of the movies that actually worked for me. And one scene in particular, it's so on the nose and so corny, but it made me emotional when I was watching it. And it's a follow-up to the characters in Chasing Amy.
Oh. Criterion film, by the way.
And then there's also a callback to Dogma,
Great.
which I found to be fun. So other than a couple callbacks that worked for me, though, this movie's pretty painful. But at the same time, I watched the whole thing. And I did feel nostalgia. I just don't know that it was actually like worth the experience. I certainly wouldn't want to pay any amount of money for it. So if you get a chance to watch this for free coming up, and you have any sort of affection for Kevin Smith's previous work, give it a shot. It's not the worst movie he's made, I don't think, in the last 20 years.
Cool. So it's not Cop Out? It's better than Cop Out?
It's
Is that what we're
definitely
saying?
not Cop Out. In my opinion, it's better than Zack and Miri Make a Porno.
Oh, yeah, that movie's not good.
In my opinion, it's on par with Clerks 2 and Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. Like, I don't think it's any worse than either of those two movies. So if those movies like meet your standard, then this movie might too, you know? All right. That's all I've got, guys. No more thoughts about Jay and Silent Bob Reboot.
Is it better than Stagecoach is the question. We'll find out soon.
That is the question. Yeah. Stay tuned. All right. With that, guys, are we ready to move into our Casually Criterion review for Stagecoach number 516? Spine number 516, that is.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Let's do it.
Well within the span of our memory, the streamliner of its day, the American stagecoach, crossed the uncharted rugged West, bringing new people to a new country. What fascinating stories there were in the life of the stagecoach, and in the lives of its courageous passengers who found romance in danger and understanding in strange companionships. From the adventures of these American frontier characters, John Ford has created a truly great motion picture, Stagecoach, a drama as forceful and as true as The Informer, and as gripping as The Hurricane.
Okay, so as always with our Criterion films, we are not going to be doing a spoiler-free general discussion about the movie. We're going to jump straight into talking about with spoilers and everything. So if you haven't seen Stagecoach yet, what are you doing? That film came out in 1939. So you've had, I don't know,
90 years?
90 some odd years to watch it. So, or is it 80?
It's 80.
80 some odd years to watch it.
Yeah, you just took what I said and ran with it.
I know. I just believed you blindly.
First mistake.
I know. But anyways, if you haven't seen Stagecoach, pause this podcast, go see Stagecoach, do yourself a favor, and then come back and finish listening to this episode.
All right, guys. Stagecoach was directed by John Ford. It stars John Wayne, Claire Trevor, Andy Devine, and Thomas Mitchell. The IMDb synopsis says, a group of people traveling on a stagecoach find their journey complicated by the threat of Geronimo and learn something about each other in the process.
The titular stagecoach.
I think it's pretty cool that they call out Geronimo, the threat of Geronimo.
Yeah.
That's neat.
It is neat.
All right. So I'll go ahead and get us started. I first saw Stagecoach when I was in my early 20s. I remember actually saving up money to get a really large John Wayne, John Ford DVD box set a while back that had like a really massive version of The Searchers in it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that, Justin?
I do, yeah. It's a good version of The Searchers. It's got like little comic book things in it, like booklets.
Yeah, and like original one-sheet poster copies and stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, back in the DVD days, I spent a lot of money on a box set with this movie in it. And at the time, I remember enjoying the film. It wasn't my favorite John Ford, John Wayne collaboration, but I did enjoy it. And I remember, since I was only starting out in Westerns at the time, when I first saw this, I didn't yet realize just how influential this movie was. I mean, now it's pretty much like one familiar trope after another. So the movie, came out in 1939, and it's still influencing stories. And anyway, so everything in this movie might seem pretty straightforward and predictable by today's standards, but I think you can see the DNA of this movie in not only Westerns that came out in the decades coming after this movie, but even in a lot of movies that are coming out now, currently. Like, there's a lot of this movie in The Ballad of Buster Scruggs that the Coen brothers put out a couple years ago. So, anyway, I think this movie is just one of those movies that even if you don't enjoy it, it's almost just too important and too influential to not have to come to terms with at some point somehow, So, yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on Stagecoach, which is it still holds up. It's still good. It just isn't my favorite, but it's just made so freaking well. It kind of like, I guess it's one of like the gold standards of Westerns.
The Citizen Kane of Westerns.
Yeah, it's just too important, and too like the techniques in the filming of it is just too influential to not just admire. This is 1939 we're talking. So those are my thoughts. I will end it there because there's so much left to say. Myke with a Y.
This is just a gush fest for me because this is my favorite Western, and Westerns are my favorite genre. So this is like really cream of the crop. So it means a lot to me that you guys would invite me on to talk about Stagecoach on your show. I guess I do have to admit, speaking to what you just said, Myke, about it being just really influential. This is my favorite Western. I don't know that I could say that this is the best Western. There's always that line between like what you love personally and what you kind of objectively have to identify as like the superior movie.
The road that any film nerd walks.
Exactly.
Really.
Yep. The New Hope versus Empire Strikes Back.
Yep.
But no, I love Stagecoach because Westerns are my favorite genre. I got to this one fairly early. I watched this in high school. I think, if I'm remembering right, I think I got to it with the American Film Institute's top 100 list. I think the first one that they did in the late 90s, it was on there. I don't think it was on when they did it 10 years later, but I was just going through that list and I was watching the movies and I got to Stagecoach and it just blew me away with how enjoyable it was. I didn't think it was going to really be much of anything because I was still kind of getting used to black and white movies. It's a bunch of people riding across the country in a stagecoach, but I loved it. And kind of what solidified my love of it is my grandpa was kind of my classic movie buddy. I came to appreciate film through him. And only after I'd seen it did I find out that Stagecoach is actually like his absolute favorite movie of all time. So we would always watch it together every couple of years because we seemed to be the only two people on the planet that just loved it as much as we did. So I've got nothing but positive things to say about it. I love every single element of it, the way it's shot, the way it's directed, the way it's acted, the way it's written. I think it's pretty dang close to being a perfect movie in my eyes.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah. And so I'll cut it off there. Justin, what do you think of it?
Well, I mean, I have a similar but different story with Stagecoach than you guys. I think I watched it around the same time that you did, Myke. It was my early 20s, and where I differ, I think, is that this was around the time that I was first getting into like older films and Westerns in general. I very much had this attitude for a long time, a lot of my youth anyways, that because my grandpa loved Westerns, I thought they were boring. Right. And like, I just had this attitude of like, cause I guess a lot of the other things my grandparents were into, I considered boring. So like Westerns and old films kind of like got lumped in with that. Cause they used to love to watch like a lot of the old Western TV shows, like, Gunsmoke and, Rawhide and The Rifleman and all of these things, that compared to Stagecoach aren't that good, I guess. But so I watched this.
Gunsmoke is pretty awesome.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I've only seen bits and pieces of it, so you might be right.
I like it.
Good. But even at the time that I was watching it, I would say that I enjoyed it, but the other Westerns that I had watched previous to this that had like opened my mind up to watching more Westerns were things like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly and The Wild Bunch, and maybe Rio Bravo was in there at that time, which is a little bit more akin to Stagecoach. But I was watching a lot more of the, like 60s and 70s, like more violent Westerns that are a little bit more gritty and raw. Mm-hmm. And so the first time that I watched Stagecoach, I thought it was, I enjoyed it, but it was kind of tame, kind of a little too like clean. John Wayne was a little bit too much of just like all around like super good guy, and there wasn't any like grit or anything to grab me. So I guess I didn't really consider it in like my top Western films, or I didn't consider it a great film at all. I think watching it this time has really turned me around on it. Like, I have been through film school since I watched it the first time. I've made films. I've watched a ton more films. I've garnered an appreciation for older, simpler films, and I've watched a ton more films that are like pre 60s and 70s gritty cinema. And and this time I mean, I thought it was fantastic. I think it's really, like you guys have said, it's well shot. I think the characters were way more like interesting, and I connected with them and was like interested in everything that was going on with them as characters, like way more than I ever remembered. And that to me is like the biggest praise that I give the film, is just giving me a Stagecoach full of like every character is interesting. I want to know what happens. I want to know how their story plays out, once they get where they're going, if they get there. I want most of them to make it. And a more recent film that involves people in like a stagecoach or people in one space, but Hateful Eight, not to like dog on Tarantino or anything like that, but like if I compare the two films, it's like they're not even close to me in terms of like characters that I'm interested in, and I think that's where Stagecoach like really shines. And I'll leave it there before I gush on and on about the characters, because I'm sure we'll do that more as we talk about the performances. So, Chris, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I, of course, have a similar experience. I don't remember exactly when I watched it, but I do remember being surprised by how much I like it at the end of watching it. It's kind of like Myke was saying, Myke with an I. It's a simple story, and you can see its influence all throughout, cinema history. I think it's a lot like a Citizen Kane or a Wizard of Oz as to what comes next. It's the granddaddy of movies that have come much further down the road. In fact, I just watched a movie called Underwater with Kristen Stewart, yes, Kristen Stewart in it, and it was very similar. It was about having to go from point A to point B with a group of people, and like all the difficulties that you encounter along the way.
Right.
Yeah. And
this movie is to like survival movies what like Beatles songs are to like modern day pop songs.
Right. Yeah.
Do you guys think that in terms of like recent movies that are really influenced by it that are like big, like Mad Max Fury Road is really in this vein? Because I kept thinking about that.
Yeah.
From what I remember.
I thought of
in
so
that
many
Mad
movies.
Max is so indebted to the Western genre as a whole, and the Western genre as a whole owes everything to Stagecoach.
Sure. I because I remember that. I've only seen it the one time, but I remember that movie basically being like one long journey from like
Yeah.
point A to point B.
Yep.
I mean,
sure,
Road
that's what it
Warrior
is.
and Fury Road are both like that.
I guess that's true. That's a fair point.
Yeah. So, Chris, you want to finish up your opening thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. So, we're going to get into a lot of this in the future, or here in the immediate future. And I would just say
Sometime in the future.
Yes, sometime in the future. This is going to be a long podcast, guys. Buckle up. But yeah, it's this great, simple story, and it's super enjoyable, really enjoyable. So yeah, let's dive into this film and see what we can talk about.
Cool. I would like to start off by responding to something that Justin mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that whenever you were first getting into westerns, you were watching a lot of like 70s gritty westerns, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, etc. I was too. I agree. I was watching, my introduction to westerns didn't start at the beginning, and I didn't go through in chronological order,
Right.
It was very much like The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, The Wild Bunch, Stagecoach. It was like jumping all over the place in decades. So I remember at the time feeling very similarly, which was that this movie felt pretty squeaky clean by comparison. But as I was doing research for it this time and just, having learned more about movies and stuff since then, I can kind of say that this is the beginning of westerns not being so squeaky clean with their characters. There is some moral gray area in this movie, in the characters. A lot of it's more implied than it is anything. We don't see them being as morally gray as like Clint Eastwood in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. But John Wayne is going back to prison. He's on the run from the law. He's not like the Lone Ranger. You know what I mean? He's not like the silent movie heroes that are just like ultra good white hats, The main character that we sympathize with first in the movie is a prostitute. So this movie does feel squeaky clean in comparison to 20 years down the road. But I would say that this is kind of the beginning of John Ford showing us that the West is full of morally gray characters.
Yeah. And I think that goes to what I was saying, how great I thought the characters were and how interested in them I was, at least compared to the first time.
I'm just calling early 20s Justin wrong.
Oh yeah, me too. That
guy sucks.
Yeah, I certainly did not appreciate this movie for what it is, and he does suck. You're right.
Just kidding. I'd still be friends with him.
You were friends with him.
I know. Can't go back and change that now.
So this is interesting, though, because I think a common criticism you can hear levied against the movie is that it sets into place the stereotypes of the Western character, the righteous outlaw, the huffy banker, the drunken doctor. But it's so funny that while it's establishing those, it's also like completely undermining their social status at the same time. Like, I think if I kind of open by just saying I love everything about the movie, but I guess if I had like a platform to stand on to praise it on this podcast, it would be that I think the movie is incredibly relevant even 80 years later because of how it analyzes how these characters stand on the social ladder.
Yeah, absolutely. And so much of what we say in all these Criterion movies that we review on this show seems to be of the effect of like, I can't believe how old this movie is and how relevant it feels to today.
Yes.
But here we are again. And I have that very similar thought, right? Like the judgmentalness or the judgment that's being passed upon these characters because of their social status. And, they're basically being run out of town and forced to go through dangerous territory. And they're being basically just, lack of a better word, kicked out of town.
I think there's even the one that struck me the most as being the most relevant is the banker and his speech that he gives, like America for Americans. And I was like, whoa, that maybe things haven't changed. And Mike, you're right. There's been a series of movies where we're like, wow, this is really relevant, like 12 Angry Men, and once again, Shock Corridor. But once again, we're at that point where like, America for Americans, and we have rallying cries, from certain people in our political system that say those things, and it's disturbing, that it's still going on,
Yeah. To me, Stagecoach is really admirable in its ability to have its cake and eat it too, that it can it can still very much belong to its time and be problematic, but also, like you said, have like words ripped out of a character's mouth from 1939 that you could like lip sync to a YouTube video of any like news report or anything. But I mean, other stuff too, like all at the same time, like it's incredibly racist and insensitive, and at the same time, it also points out, there's a great line, like there's worse things than Apaches.
Mm-hmm. And I was interested too. The Apaches, while problematic, they are essentially the monster, or they're the ones chasing him. Of course, we never really get to know them. They're faceless, and maybe that's why it's problematic. And you guys can help me out with that. The real drama is, with Ringo and avenging his family. They're just the like in Underwater. The movie I watched, it was like some sort of sea creature that was chasing him, and that's just how it kind of fits in there, Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, it's insensitive.
It's almost like they're a force of nature. Like there's man versus man versus nature, these kinds of like plots, right? And they're almost like, they're not treated the most sensitively, but it's almost like if it were space, it would be the vacuum of space and survival that is like pressing down on them. You know what I mean? So it's just like the environment they're in, they're treated. I wish there was more scenes with Apaches, like any kind of character, like the wife character, I wish we have gotten a little bit more of her, but it's almost like they are treated as like just a force of nature. They could be anything. It's just what they have to run from to get them in close quarters and in such intense environments. But movies need that kind of thing. I agree, though. I wish that it had been a little more nuanced. And I think if there's anything wrong with the movie, it's that it is very much from that point of view and not being very outwardly thinking,
Yeah, and it's funny because I don't think it takes like too much of a stretch to fix the problem is too simplistic a term. But, taking history into account, and this whole problem with Geronimo that they say in the opening scene is like he's jumped off the reservation. The reservation that the government has forced him into and taken his land. And so it becomes like, he's not such a bad guy. He just wants his home back. And this is the only means he has to do it. But that's similarly the plight of our characters, is they're being forced out of a society that's supposed to welcome them, where they're supposed to be able to coexist. So, it's kind of one of those things that when you look a little bit more outside the box and apply some historical context, all of a sudden it's like, oh, they're not so different, but the movie does choose to not really delve into that and instead use them as an antagonistic force, that the Apaches are this faceless force of nature that's out there and makes the wilderness unsafe. But at the same time, civilization's not safe either. To speak to what you guys were saying, is like the real climax and the real conflict to overcome is not, are we going to make it through the wilderness to Lordsburg? Is the status quo going to be disrupted, or is things going to be business as usual at the end of the journey? Right,
exactly. So, it's almost like if you take and look at like, okay, our characters and the Apaches are in a similar situation, which is that society has deemed them undesirable and told them where they can and cannot live. And so I don't know if this was ever intended, for us to think of the Apaches this way, but if you want to look at it that way, you could almost look at this as like a critique on our culture and society in general and the way that we treat anything different, whether it be our own peers that just happen to be prostitutes, or, a cowhand gone wrong, or, a complete society that we moved in and completely destroyed, Yeah.
Do you think the movie is sympathetic enough towards Native Americans and the Apaches to take it that way? Or are you saying that we could look at it that way now in hindsight?
Oh, I'm saying we could look at it that way in hindsight. I don't think the movie was intending to be. Unfortunately, I don't get the impression that they were intending to look at the Apaches in a very humane way.
No, I mean, there's like bits of evidence you could pull from to maybe build a case, but it's all just way too flippant. Like in the first scene, distinguishing between like the different Native American tribes and them saying like, oh, he's a Cheyenne. They hate Apaches like worse than we do. It seems like a moment of like, oh, this movie is aware that there's not just faceless masses of bad Indians out there, but then that is what they become. And similarly with Yakima, Chris's wife, who's an Apache squaw, there's a chance there to get a little perspective on the Apache viewpoint, and instead she's kind of used as a plot device that she betrays the group. She makes the guys run off with their spare horses, and she sneaks out in the night and brings the Apaches, tells them where all those white people are hiding. So yeah, it's definitely the movie does not mean to do that. But I guess credit where credit is due. You take small victories wherever you can with old Westerns. John Ford did at least hire actual Native American actors and extras for this, because later in Westerns, as the stories start to become a little more sympathetic, we're hiring white people and putting them in red face. So at least Stagecoach is hiring authentic Native Americans to play Native Americans.
It's a small win, but I'll take it.
Tiny win.
Yeah. I will say that one scene that could have greatly improved the entire plot line with the wife character would just be like a scene where she basically like talks to anyone else in her tribe and is basically like, now we'll get back at them. You know what I mean?
Right.
Or like, now they'll get what's coming to them. Like, so we can kind of see that like they have a point of view in this whole thing. Like they view us as the outsiders, but nope, we didn't even get that. But moving on.
Movie's too tightly paced for that.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting that this is the first of 3 movies that John Ford directed in 1939. Do you guys know what movies he made the same year?
I know Young Mr. Lincoln is one of them.
Yep. And then Drums Along the Mohawk. I've seen both of those movies. I think Young Mr. Lincoln is... I actually like that one better than this one and Drums Along the Mohawk. I think 1939 was a heck of a year for John Ford.
Heck of a year for movies.
Yeah,
that's true.
Young Mr. Lincoln's also on Criterion, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think John Ford is just like a super prolific filmmaker, and he's an interesting one to think about because, to my understanding, from what I've heard, he's not necessarily like one of those filmmakers that super loves cinema and has like this like heady approach towards it. It's very much I've heard him talk about it sounds kind of like it's a job for him, and he talk about it the same way that like, we would talk about going into our 9 to 5 every day.
Yeah.
Right.
Everything came very naturally to him. He would tout like he just had a natural eye for composition. But yeah, he's not like an artiste. He's good at what he does, and it's like you said, it's a job for him.
Yeah.
Have you ever watched his interviews? And this is maybe a little bit off topic, but they are so great. He's so grumpy about the whole thing.
Yeah, I wanted to bring this up to talk about the set specifically. It's really rough to watch a John Ford interview. He's the crotchiest man that ever lived. What's even better, I think, is to listen to Peter Bogdanovich tell stories about times he interviewed John Ford, because he does the voices for both of them. So it's like you're there, but it's a little less awkward.
Yeah,
that's fun. Are you just watching those on YouTube, or is there some other place?
He's got one on the Criterion Blu-ray. They've got like a 15-minute thing of Bogdanovich just breaking down John Ford and Stagecoach. But YouTube and really like anything that has to do with John Ford or Howard Hawks, because Bogdanovich was friends with both of, like, he's one of the few people that managed to be friends with both these guys.
And that man loves to talk.
Yeah, it's super
my
fun.
Cravat.
It's super fun to hear Bogdanovich talk about interviewing those two guys.
It's interesting that we say that like John Ford, he's not necessarily an artiste. He doesn't consider himself to be like an auteur or anything like that. He's very much approaching it from like a what's the best way to tell the story standpoint, and that's just what he's doing. And I think that's so interesting when you look at John Wayne's introduction in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I mean, that has got to be one of the all-time classic introductions to a character.
Oh yeah, engineered to make you a star.
Exactly. Like he wanted us to know, like, this guy is cool. I'm gonna make this guy look cool.
Yeah, this is your hero.
And the idea of making someone look cool and look like a movie star, but you're not approaching it from perspective of an artist, you're just being like, how do I make this guy look cool? I think that's an interesting way to like, a no nonsense guy like that, maybe not even like approaching it the same way we would approach it, but just being like, how can I make one of just like an intro for the ages, you'll never forget it. And that's of all the shots in this movie, that's the one I never forgot. From the first time I saw it to now,
Yeah, it's the one I can still see in my head, and I'm kind of find myself waiting for. I mean, you have kind of like images, I think, of maybe it's from like other movies of his, of like the rock formations and stuff that he's always shooting around. You remember those, but like almost like frame for frame, like second for second, I remember the shot, like how long it lasts, what the camera does. Yeah,
and I think it's just so interesting that, John Wayne, he wasn't a new actor by any means at this point, but he was definitely not a star. And that intro alone, I think, did it. So I just think it's one of the coolest intros ever, and we would be remiss not to talk about it, or at least bring it up.
For sure. I think there's a couple of them. There's a moment in The Searchers, too, when he rides up and everything's burned, and he flips out his gun. That's really great too. So I think like John Wayne and John Ford just have a bunch of these moments that are just really great. What is you guys' familiarity with Andy Devine? He plays Buck in here, the stagecoach driver.
Friar Tuck from Robin Hood, right?
Yeah, he's definitely the voice of Friar Tuck from Robin Hood.
Yeah, that voice. I'm happy anytime I hear that voice, to be honest. And it's
it's not. Is it Friar Tuck or is it the sheriff in Robin Hood?
I think he's Friar
Tuck. I have it right here.
Who's the voice of the big sheriff?
That's
the wolf sheriff guy.
It's some comedian, because like somebody, it is Friar Tuck for Andy Devine, by the way. But there's
that was my first instinct, but then I second guessed myself.
Pat Buttram is the sheriff, and he's like a stand-up comedian. And there's actually a pretty funny video out there on YouTube where someone took like audio of him telling like a very vulgar, dirty joke in one of his bits, and put it in as the audio over like a scene from Robin Hood.
Nice.
And it works pretty well.
Sounds funny.
Yeah, recommend looking that up. But he's funny. I mean, I guess he's more than anybody, he's like the comic relief.
Yeah, I was gonna say, talk about a thankless role, but like was it you, Justin, that was saying like it's so impressive how the movie can keep like 9 different characters very balanced and keep you interested in them?
Yeah,
like his role is to kind of whine, be the voice of reason, but constantly be shut down, and that's kind of like his shtick. But he doesn't come off as like a nuisance.
Yeah, and he's also not necessarily a coward. He's just like, let's go back.
Yeah.
This is the best idea.
It's like this character. This is silly, but he's the inspiration for Jar Jar Binks. Like Jar Jar Binks is supposed to be like this type of character, but it obviously is much more successful here.
Well, I mean, this movie, like every character is basically like, I don't want to call them archetypes, but basically they're like, they're a character we've seen before. I mean, you have the timid, shy businessman type who like never gets a word in edgewise, and he's like, but he's likable. You got the prostitute who's really lovable, like, the old whore with a heart of gold. Yeah. Then you have, the outlaw, but he's actually just a good dude who's trying to like get revenge for his family, like an honest outlaw, Mm-hmm. This whole movie's just chock full to the brim. You even have like a pregnant woman giving birth in an intense situation. And a doctor who has to sober up really quick. Like
that old trope.
This movie is just that's why I said earlier, this movie is just trope after trope. Yeah. But it's tropes quilted together so well that that's the reason they became tropes, is because this movie just rocked them so hard.
Yeah, I do want to talk about like the women characters, because that's one of the things that surprised me more this time, was just how like good those characters and roles are. Like I don't know what that says about me when I watch it the first time, but what had stuck in my head over the 10, 12 years, however long it's been since I watched it the first time, was of course like John Wayne. I remember Thomas Mitchell as the drunken doctor being great, and Andy Devine, like that voice you don't really forget. But I don't know, they really struck me as just a little more nuanced, a little more interesting and deep of characters than I remembered. And Dallas in general, I think it's, I mean, you said it earlier, Myke. I think that like they don't explain, they don't say it explicitly, but you get the idea that she's like a prostitute.
Oh yeah.
I was going to ask you guys, I guess, about that, is like if that's for sure what she did, and do you guys like that they just kind of let that mystery hang?
No, I didn't really view it as a mystery. I was like, she's definitely a prostitute.
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind she's a prostitute, which I find funny because Louise Platt, who plays Mrs. Mallory, who's pregnant and delivers en route to Lordsburg, she doesn't look 9 months pregnant because censorship of the time doesn't allow her to show outward signs of being pregnant. That's not considered polite. Yet there's this whole character where they never explicitly say she's a prostitute, but I've never heard anybody have like any other reading, like not even like, oh, she works in a saloon or something. Like everybody knows instantly, like she is a prostitute.
Right. So maybe mystery is the wrong word, but I guess like there's something that works about that, even though it's a thing that they're doing, I guess, due to censorship. Or whatever reason they're doing it, but there's something about that works in a way that it doesn't. They never like have the scene where they explicitly come out and like call her a prostitute, which maybe like a scene like that, it's very easy for it to like go over the top and feel like heavy-handed, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of avoid that through whatever means, and I think that really works.
Yeah, it definitely lends it a lot of nuance, which is great part of the movie's charm. That's another thing I really, really appreciate in terms of like the movie's social commentary is in terms of talking about how society will isolate people as scapegoats, that Dallas is being run out of town because she's a prostitute and she brings the moral fiber of the community down. But Ford has like these small shots of a bunch of dudes kind of gathered together on the sidewalks watching her go. And it kind of calls attention to like the women of the Law and Order League are running Dallas out of town, and none of these guys are going to catch crap. But like Dallas was clearly doing business with somebody.
Sure, yeah. Who's
they're
paying
not
her?
going down for it. Yeah.
We haven't talked too much about Thomas Mitchell, but we're kind of on that like people that are being run out of town for like a moral thing. Like he's being run out of town just for being like generally drunk. Is that right?
Yeah, being a crappy doctor who let them down. He probably did something stupid whenever he was trying to fix someone up because he was drunk.
Yeah.
I feel like he's a good doctor, though. Like, he's just always drunk and mad, you know, like...
I don't get the impression he's a good or bad doctor. I feel like he's just a drunk. Like, I don't really know if we get any clues about his skills.
The impression I get is that the ladies of the Law and Order League are kind of on a crusade on this fateful day to get a couple of the undesirables out of town. So that the prostitute is an easy mark. The drunken doctor is an easy mark.
Yeah. This is like, did you, I know, Justin, you've seen it, but Myke, you being a fan of Westerns, have you seen an Italian Western from the director of the Italian movie Zombie called Four of the Apocalypse?
I have heard of it, but never seen it.
So the plot is very similar. Like it starts out and like a prostitute, a drunk, and like a Doc Holliday type gambler are getting run out of town. And they basically have to go across like the desert into like dangerous territory and run across some zany characters and stuff like that. But yeah, that's something that's going around in Westerns a lot. You know, that's what I was saying. This movie is so influential. You can see this movie in so many other movies. The idea that you would have like these conservative leagues that would cleanse these towns of all the behavior that they deemed inappropriate to try and clean it up, but like really they're just doing way more damage than anything.
Right.
By like sending these people out into like dangerous areas and like they're basically killing these people a lot of times, but they don't care.
And kind of indirectly funded by the most hypocritical figure of them all in Gatewood.
And, he's kind of like the bad guy of the group, but I think when you first watch the film, you get this impression there's a bit more of a mustache twirler bad guy, or like seemingly, and like gambler. Like he seems like he's going to be like pretty evil because he has that look and just kind of that demeanor about him.
I mean, he's got a pretty cool look if you're going to ask me.
Oh, totally. He's really cool.
He's the coolest one of them all. As far as like, if I were going to be in this Stagecoach, that's who I would be. Yeah, I mean, I guess he presents himself as like a straightforward, honorable dude, but really he just seems kind of like pathetic and horny to me.
That's fair.
Did you say horny or corny?
Horny.
Oh, okay.
But corny too.
That raises an interesting question. Do you guys believe Hatfield's intentions are pure? Do you think he really is into this stature as a gentleman and escorting Mrs. Mallory out of honor, or do you think he has eyes for her?
I mean, realistically, I think he's doing it out of honor. I was just being silly back then, but I think he's doing it out of honor because we're supposed to be like, oh, is this our hero? And then when John Wayne enters the scene, we're like, oh, we like this guy way better, but he's a bad guy. Why do we like the bad guy more than we like this like dude who's doing like a noble thing? But then at the same time, he's doing like this noble thing. He's treating everyone who's not that woman in the Stagecoach not as well.
Right. I love the moments where John Wayne's just kind of flabbergasted, because
at the rudeness.
Yeah, he's like, "What about the other lady?" Like there's like no golden cup with this one, but he hands her the water. I do enjoy that part.
So to answer your question, I think that's what it is. I think it's like it's the misdirection, right? We're supposed to be like, this is our hero, and then when John Wayne enters the scene, we're like, well, screw that guy.
Also, he's presented to us as not a great person. He's a gambler, like a degenerate gambler. And then, like a lot of the characters, it's revealed that he has honor, And I think that that's kind of a theme with all of our characters. And same thing with the banker, just opposite, He's presented as a bastion of the town, but he's really evil,
Yeah, well, it's interesting you say that we think that guy's our hero, but like, because I had the opposite reaction, like, just everything that was set up with that guy just felt so like kind of sinister to me. And whenever he was like, I'm going to get on the Stagecoach, I was like, he's trying to get with
Lucy,
the pregnant woman, Lucy Mallory. And I don't know, just like the shots of him and like the way that he's like peering at her through the window and stuff. Because I think he knows that she's married pretty quickly and continues to kind of like stare at her and try to like be around her. I don't know. I got a little bit more of a creepy vibe.
I just got the impression that he was just being that old timey movie style gentleman that like you see a lot in like Alfred Hitchcock movies or something like that, where it's just like overly gentlemanly.
Yeah. Okay.
Like chivalrous,
I get the implication that Hatfield is a man very much out of time. He's had a fall from grace away from a prestigious gentlemanly upbringing. And Lucy, being from the South, also having a common connection, kind of like reawakens that within him, that him seeing her kind of breaks him out of, being out in the fringes of civilization, being a degenerate gambler, and starting his desire to redeem himself and retain like his former identity.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is like I'm used to the trope of like the gambler that's not really that bad of a dude in Westerns. Mm-hmm. Like Doc Holliday from Tombstone. I grew up on Tombstone, and I got strong Doc Holliday vibes from this, this character. Like, Maverick types,
Yeah.
So I didn't necessarily get that vibe, but I get it because like he looks so dastardly with his like angular face and his mustache and his cape thing.
He's definitely like a Snidely Whiplash looking dude.
Yeah, maybe that's it.
Like he could hop in a car with a dog at any point, go up there and try to like blow up the road so all the racers fall off the.
That's right.
Off the road.
If only he'd had the chance.
Yeah.
That's what this movie is missing.
The wacky races section.
Yeah.
All the other stagecoaches that didn't make it.
Yeah. But speaking of, I guess, stagecoaches and stuff, I did want to talk a little bit about like that action scene, like the big one, the climactic one where they're going across and they get attacked. Particularly, I wanted to call out just like the stunt work in it. At times, like there's very few movies out there that like I know that it's a stunt man and I know that it's like planned to a degree, but like I was just so worried about that stunt man who was like jumping out onto the horses and like the one that similar to me likes to fall between horses.
Yeah, exactly.
Like-
That's why you were so nervous.
I know. I was like, oh, don't do it. I know how this can go wrong.
Or the guy that goes under them and under the stagecoach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Like, I was just like, like tensed up for that guy. And maybe it's a little bit of like shock from having seen Ben-Hur.
Did you guys?
Oh,
Oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was going to ask, did you guys watch the special feature on the Blu-ray that chronicles? I think his name is Yakima Canutt. He's the stunt man that worked on the movie.
No, I haven't. I have the DVD. I think they're the same.
Yeah.
The special features, but I haven't dove into those.
I mean, not that you need like any more ammo to just appreciate how gutsy a move that is, but it's really just cool for them to talk about, because I think Vic Armstrong, there's like a modern stunt coordinator who's kind of facilitating the discussion and appreciating the work, and kind of like there's like no safety precautions on this. He's just doing it.
Yeah, I mean,
They could do that stunt today, and it would be like 100% do it. But my immediate reaction would be, where's the CG? Or like, what did they wipe out?
Right.
Where did, like, how did they do it for real? Even if they did it like 100%, I would disbelieve it. Seeing it in a film today.
Yeah, they'd almost have to do it like in one of those Mission Impossible like behind the scenes featurettes where like they show you all the behind the scenes for like all the action scenes in the movie all have like bonus features out that you can see before the movie's even in theaters.
yeah,
You're right,
so that
yeah.
So you
going in.
Yeah, so you know every action scene and how it was made before it even shows up in the context of the actual story.
Which surprisingly works, because then you just know it's real,
so you
and
sell
it
those things.
adds that suspense, man.
Yeah, I was gonna say whenever you brought this up, it is thrilling watching the stuntman do that, and it reminded me a lot of the final chase of Death Proof on the car when Zoe Bell is like on the hood of that car,
Yeah.
and they're going like 60 miles per hour or whatever.
Yeah, I was just tense that whole sequence with her on like the hood. For that reason, it's because like it's just real and you can't fake it. And I'm not necessarily advocating that we put people's lives in danger for my entertainment, but if people do it, I'm gonna enjoy it.
Yeah, that is the creed of.
But I won't say
stuntman.
don't do it.
What's that?
Don't not do it.
You'll say don't not do it?
Yeah, whatever. I don't know. Whatever one makes sense for what I'm trying to say.
I'm not even sure anymore.
Me neither.
Well, cool. Does anybody have anything else? Any points we haven't touched on about Stagecoach?
No. After this, my girlfriend and I put in Rio Bravo and watched that on
Excellent.
Blu-ray.
Nice.
And that remains my favorite John Wayne movie.
Yeah, it's a fair one, I think. Maybe a close second for me is Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, but it's not that.
I love that
It's
movie.
not that close of a second.
I love The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. I love The Searchers. But I think Rio Bravo is like the special place in my heart. Because it's got Dean Martin and John Wayne.
Yeah, and Ricky Nelson.
And Ricky Nelson. And Howard Hawks is just... I love Howard Hawks' sensibilities. Like his really like whip snap dialogue. It's like really funny all the time and sharp.
Yeah, I think Angie Dickinson, when she has her scenes where she's kind of besting John Wayne and like embarrassing
man.
John Wayne, is
MVP
key.
of that movie,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
Some key
Absolutely.
cinema. Not to gush
Yeah.
too much about movies that aren't Stagecoach.
But just, it whet my appetite for John Wayne movies.
Well, cool. So that sounds like it does it.
Yeah, so I guess it's time to end the review and then pick the theme for our next Criterion poll.
Okay, so for our Criterion poll, regular Mike, Chris, and I are each going to choose 3 films for you to vote on based on a theme. And this week, since we have a guest, we're going to let our guest, Mike with a Y, he's going to choose the theme for us to choose our 3 films from. So, Mike with a Y, what theme do you have for us?
Let's get this puppet show started. So I wanted to thank you guys for inviting me on, not just to talk about Westerns, which I love, but to talk about my favorite Western. I just tickled pink. I love talking about Westerns. I don't get to do them a lot on CineMusts because I let guest hosts choose the movies that they want to, and Westerns are not the most popular genre. So
Dude, well, if you ever want
was-
to do Westerns, invite me on again.
Yeah, man, I got your back. We're gonna have a great show in July. Anyways, Westerns are a hard sell for me, but I recommend so many of them to so many people, even though it's not a popular genre. So that's the theme I'm going with. I want you guys to nominate a movie in the Criterion Collection that you love that is a hard sell. Does that adequately explain the criteria?
Yeah, I think it does. Yes.
Yeah.
And it could be a hard
cool.
sell for any reason, I guess. Like if it was a super long movie or something, or
super long, unpopular genre, unpopular star, length of the movie, whatever.
okay,
Cool.
And I don't know if you guys have an order for who goes first, but I think since he has an awesome name, I'm inclined to let Myke go first.
Oh, well. Thank you.
Ouch.
Thank you, Myke.
Yeah.
Sure. So mine is actually going to be on theme with this episode. Not the Western we just talked about, but it's a hard sell because the director has fallen in a lot of people's eyes in recent years.
Interesting.
And I've only seen this movie one time, so I'm going with Chasing Amy.
Oh. Wow. I didn't see that coming.
Yeah. I've never been able to get anyone, I've only tried like twice in my entire lifetime, but I've never been able to get anyone excited to watch that movie with me again.
You haven't asked me, I guess. I really like Chasing Amy. But
well, yeah, for a long time, I thought I didn't like it. But like, you know what? I've been like, I need to give that movie a second shot. So the Jay and Silent Bob reboot kind of sealed the deal.
Yeah.
Because my favorite scene in the movie was a continuation of that movie. And I was like, you know what? Maybe I do need to see this movie again. So I'm going to be more serious about it. And this is my excuse.
Okay. So it's not quite one that you love.
Now, just a hard sell because of who's in it and who stars in it and who made it.
Yeah, fair enough.
This is a good pick.
Yeah, a surprise, I think, for sure.
Yeah, a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one. Star Wars quote.
All right, Chris, what are you going to throw out there?
Yeah, so mine is a tough sell because it's black and white, and it's
Boring.
actually boring. Yeah, I've already lost Myke with the eye.
Yawn.
Yeah. And it's kind of filmed in a mock documentary style, and it's got the blackest of black humor in it. And that is Man Bites Dog.
That's right.
Oh, yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah. I actually really like this movie quite a bit, but it would be very difficult, and I'd have to know the person before I could recommend this movie to them.
Yeah.
It was made in 92, which actually
Not like
surprised
Sallow,
me.
which you recommended me the first time you ever met me.
Yeah. that fateful night at Blockbuster, I was like, have you seen the poop eating movie? And
You look like the kind of guy that would enjoy that.
Yeah. But yeah, so Man Bites Dog. I also want to just put out there that I have won every single poll in the year 2020. So I think I want to keep that tradition going. And with that, Justin, what is your choice?
All right, so my choice is a hard sell because not a lot happens in this movie, but I absolutely love it. This movie is literally a conversation between two people sitting in a booth of a restaurant over dinner, and the film is My Dinner with Andre. But I managed one time in film school to convince like 3 or 4 of our friends, like where we were just hanging out, to go to the film house and go to the screening room and watch My Dinner with Andre. I don't know how I did it in hindsight, but just like, to me, if you had told me forever ago, if I was trying to sell someone on like a movie that was just 2 people having dinner and just talking with no cutaways to anything else, I just think I would have a hard time getting anyone to watch that nowadays.
I think the Community episode helped with that.
Was that? Oh, that might have. Yeah. Okay.
Very much.
Yeah, that's probably why.
I watched it.
Yeah, that's probably why they were into it then, because that had just come out recently.
Yeah, because exactly like 1/10 of the people that we saw that with got that.
Yeah, it was just like me and you. I think we're the only people who'd seen who'd seen it. But yes, I genuinely do like really love this movie. I did watch it. I don't know, probably a little under 2 years ago, year and a half ago, just to revisit it, and like I talked about it in our News on the March segment, I believe. And it's just, it gets better and better every time. So yeah, that's my pick. My Dinner with Andre.
Cool. I've actually seen all 3 of these options. So
me too.
This is awesome.
Yeah, it's going to be a revisit no matter what. Like Man Bites Dog, I've only seen once, and it's been a long time.
Same.
So that's probably the most like a new movie to me. The other two I'm very familiar with. But to recap those again, actually, Michael, why you want to recap those choices for us?
I would love to. So Myke has Chasing Amy from director Kevin Smith. Chris is going with Man Bites Dog, and Justin is doing My Dinner with Andre.
Perfect. Nailed it.
Yeah.
And I'm excited. I know where my vote's going.
Nice. Do you want to tell us where your vote's going? Yeah, right now.
I wouldn't dare sway the listeners.
Okay, fair enough.
Good, because it needs to be Chasing Amy.
I actually feel like Chasing Amy is going to win. That's the kind of the most popular one on the.
I think that's fair. Unless people think it's funny to make us watch My Dinner with Andre.
Losers.
Yeah.
I was gonna say I was kind of surprised you guys signed on for this theme because it's so dedicated to like what's a theme I can do to make you watch something you probably really don't want to watch.
Yeah. Well, you caveated it with the fact that it's a movie we love but would have a hard time selling other people.
That one of you has to love, the other two don't have to love it.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, that's true.
These are good picks though.
Cool. And again, if you want to vote in the polls, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Casual Cinecast, and the poll is on Twitter.
I guess we are done here, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Well, stay tuned to this channel. Next week, we'll be putting out an episode on the best films of the 2010s.
That's right. It's our decade in review sort of thing. So
yeah,
exciting.
And last week we put out our best films of 2019. So give that a listen.
I'm just going to keep the same list.
Only 2019 films?
Yeah, those are my favorite movies.
Yeah.
Cool.
Perfect.
Yeah, if you want to let us know what your favorite films from the 2010s are, you want to go vote in our Criterion poll, and you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at Casual Cinecast. You can also send your best films of the decade or whatever to casualcinemedia@gmail.com.
Myke with a Y, it was a pleasure having you on here. I really appreciate it. All your insightful things about Stagecoach. Also, Myke with an I, it was good to have you on here too.
Thanks.
You're here more often.
Never happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Myke with a Y, you want to tell us once again your podcast, where people can find you, where they can contact you?
Oh, yep. We're at CineMusts. We spell it CineMusts. You can find us just by typing that in wherever. Like, that's what we are on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Like I said, we're unfortunately on a bit of a hiatus right now, but we're delivering like some sporadic episodes here and there, and we should be back in full swing once summer gets rolling around. So I'm still taking like requests for shows. I still don't have anything lined up specifically for February. So if there's a romance movie you'd love to hear us put up for must-see status, you can email us at cinemusts@gmail.com or just message us on whatever social media platform you enjoy the most.
Chasing Amy.
Yeah,
McCabe and Miss Miller.
My Dinner with Andre.
I'm just keeping Westerns in check.
Thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
All right. Bye.